Are prologues bad? When is it acceptable to write a prologue? How can you tell if your prologue isn't necessary? And what can you do if your story requires a prologue? I'm answering all these questions for you today. Let's get started. Hey guys, Nour here and welcome back to my channel. And for those visiting for the first time, hello, I'm the fantasy author of the novel Divinity Falling. Be sure to subscribe for weekly writing advice videos. I've noticed recently that a lot of newbie writers don't know when and when not to write a prologue. In fact, more often than not, it seems that new writers choose to include a prologue in their story simply because they think it elevates their story's quality. Kind of like, if I write a prologue, then I can create a piece that looks like one of those real authors' books, and therefore I can imitate those authors. At least that's my theory, but I don't say this with judgment. The reason I think some writers think this way is because I used to think this way myself when I first started out. But it's important to learn when it's acceptable to write a prologue and when it's just not doing you any favors. To start, let me just say that not all prologues are bad. If they're executed well and serve a purpose, then they can certainly be great. But if you don't know how to execute them well, then you probably won't, so it's better to just not write one. Now, when is it acceptable to write a prologue? The answer is only if your story needs some sort of background or history to kickstart your story's events. Something along the lines of, before your current story's timeline, something happened that created a domino effect which led to the current story. Now, this doesn't mean that you should think of some random background event and stuff it into your prologue just to be able to have a prologue. More often than not, you probably don't need a prologue. In fact, I avoid writing prologues 99% of the time. So before writing that prologue, stop and ask yourself, can your story not go on without it? If you were not to include that prologue, would things not make sense going forward? If your answer is yes, that it wouldn't make sense, then you need that prologue to lay the foundation for the rest of your story. But if the answer is no, then a prologue serves no purpose. This is also a great way to tell if your current prologue isn't necessary. Just because you wrote it down doesn't mean it has to stay. You know the saying, kill your darlings? Live by it when it comes to your writing. But please don't actually kill your real life darlings. But yeah, if your prologue doesn't work, delete it. An example of a bad prologue I stumbled upon recently, written by a newbie writer, is one that read like a terribly written book blurb. It just summarized the characters' feelings and powers, ones they haven't even discovered they have yet in the story. This prologue served no purpose, and it spoiled the story's main plot twist. My advice to you, just let the reader discover things as they happen. This kind of prologue isn't going to do anyone any good. Now, if your story requires a prologue in order to make sense, keep your prologue short. I'm not saying to only write a paragraph. I'm just saying, don't ramble on. This can be a full chapter length or only a few pages. As long as you could write the necessary things, do so and get out. Another rule you should remember when writing a prologue is to not info dump. In other words, don't do all your world building in the prologue. The reader will feel overwhelmed and probably end up skipping the chapter. Or worse, they might toss your story aside, and you don't want that. If you must world build, do so sparingly. Basically, stick to providing the information that the reader won't learn in the rest of the story. This is the time to lay the groundwork for later events. You can even foreshadow later events to entice the reader and keep them invested. Just don't overdo it. Again, you don't want to spoil the story itself. And my final advice is to keep the prologue exciting. I'm not saying that you should just throw your readers in random action that keeps them confused. What I am saying though is that what you write should still draw your readers in. If you're writing about characters, make sure they're interesting to read about. If you're going for suspense, make sure the reader can easily pick up on it. Don't confuse readers or try to shock them with cheap tricks. Just write an interesting read just like you would any other chapter, and make sure it serves a purpose. So that's all I have for you today. I'd love to know, are you a fan of prologues or do you typically skip them? Let me know in the comments. If you're new to my channel, make sure you subscribe. I put out weekly writing advice videos that will take your story to the next level. Also, don't forget to follow me on social media to see what I'm up to from day to day and to chat with me. And before we go, I just want to give a quick shout out to Sarah Frayne, Lori B, and Alan J. Early from my shout out tier over on Patreon, as well as all my amazing patrons. Thank you all so much for your support. I really appreciate it. You guys are the best. And remember, Nour for president!